يا هلا بالدكتور سيد في جلستنا نورنا. مورز لو عطانا القوة بس السوفت وير هو الأساس. Parallel computing يوازي كل بروسيس بخلاص. Flynn's taxonomy صنف instruction و data streams. The critical path هو الليمت. Amdahl's law يحقق الأحلام. هذه محاضرة 12 مفاهيم تخلي عقلك عال العال. يا دكتور سيد إبداعك هو أقوى مثال.
Welcome everyone. This is the start of our journey into one of the most critical and fascinating areas of modern computing, deep learning for intrusion detection. Think of intrusion detection like a high-tech security guard for computer systems. In this course, we're going to teach that security guard, our computer program, how to be smarter and better at spotting trouble using deep learning. The goal for this module is to understand the hardware foundations that make this deep learning possible, starting with a core concept, parallel processing. We're talking about how computers can do lots of work at the same time. Before we talk about deep, let's talk about fast. You've probably noticed that your phone, your laptop, everything gets faster every year. Why? The biggest driver is something called Moore's Law. Simply put, Moore's Law is the principle that the number of transistors we can fit onto a microchip doubles roughly every 2 years. More transistors mean more power and capability. It's an incredible principle that has guided the entire computer industry for decades, constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible. It's the reason why your smartphone is 1,000 times more powerful than the supercomputer that helped land a person on the moon. Now, Moore's Law is a fantastic success story, but let's look at the reality. This slide shows a graph from a report that tracks the history of microprocessors. You can see the initial Moore's Law trend, orange line, showing that rapid, steady growth. But look closer. Around the mid-2000s, things started to change, particularly with the breakdown of Dennard's scaling, purple line. Dennard's scaling basically said that as transistors got smaller, they'd use less power. When that broke down, we hit a wall where we couldn't just keep making single processors faster without them overheating. This forced a massive change. Look at the black line. This is the age of increased parallelism. Since we couldn't make one chip faster, we started putting many processing units on the same chip, forcing us to rethink how we program. This graph is a perfect visual of a huge technological shift. Here is the key takeaway from that historical shift. Hardware is still getting more powerful. Moore's Law is still somewhat active, but the performance boost is no longer transparent to software. What does that mean? Think of it like this. You bought a super fast, professional-grade oven, the new hardware, but you're still using an old, simple recipe that says, bake 1 cookie at a time, the old software. The oven could bake 20 cookies at once, but the recipe limits it. Serial execution, doing one instruction after another, is like that simple recipe. For computers to get truly faster, the software needs a new recipe that tells the hardware, cook 20 cookies at the same time. We need to write code that embraces parallelism. And that brings us to the core of our next few topics, parallel computing. Here's the official definition: the simultaneous use of multiple compute resources to solve a computational problem. In simpler terms, it's a computer multitasking. Instead of one brain doing all the work, serial, or using many brains, or many processing units, to do multiple parts of the problem at the exact same time. This is the fundamental technique that allows deep learning models to train on massive amounts of data in a reasonable time. To talk about parallelism accurately, we need to agree on 3 fundamental terms. First, the processor or CPU. This is the physical piece of hardware, the independent computing unit, the brain. A computer must have at least one. Second, a process. This is a sequential set of instructions being executed by the CPU. Think of a single running app on your phone. Third, a program. This is the complete set of instructions, which might be composed of one or more processes working together to achieve a task. A game, for example, is a program, but the game's AI, graphics, and physics might be separate processes. Now, we take those basic terms and define different types of programs. It's like classifying different kinds of construction teams. Sequential program one process on one CPU, the simplest. One builder, one task, one by one. Concurrent program, two or more processes sharing resources, multiple builders sharing the same tools and workspace, like an operating system. They might not be working at the exact same microsecond, but they are all active, giving the illusion of working simultaneously. Parallel program, several processes on one or more CPUs. This is our goal. Multiple builders are actively working at the same time on different parts of the project, speeding it up. Distributed program, parallel across several computers, multiple parallel teams, each on a different computer, connected by a network. This is how massive systems like Google or Amazon work. Parallel computing is not a given. It takes a whole team working together. There are 4 key requirements that must all be met for it to work. First, processor architecture. The hardware itself must be designed to support parallelism, like having multiple cores. Second, operating system. It must recognize and manage those parallel capabilities with the right drivers. Third, compiler. The software that turns our human-readable code into machine code must be smart enough to translate it into parallel instructions. And finally, libraries. Most importantly for us, the programmer needs to incorporate special code libraries like CUDA or OpenMP to tell the computer, hey, run these 2 things at the same time. So, once we have a parallel program, how does it actually run? The key is that a sequential program has a single thread of control, one path of instructions. A parallel program has multiple threads or processes. Think of threads as subtasks within a single process. These separate threads must work together. To do that, they need 2 things: communication, talking to each other, and synchronization, making sure they don't step on each other's toes. This leads us to the 2 big questions in parallel programming. What instructions will each process execute? And what memory can they use? This slide dives into how communication and synchronization are achieved. Communication, how do threads talk? They can use shared variables in a shared memory model, like leaving a note in a common mailbox, or they can use message passing in a distributed memory model, like sending an email. Synchronization, how do we keep order? Mutual exclusion is critical. This ensures that a critical section of code, where data is being updated, is only accessed by one process at a time. It's like a do not disturb sign on a shared room. Conditional synchronization simply delays a process until another process has finished a specific task. It's saying don't start painting until the drywall is up. Before you can run anything in parallel, you have to map it out. That's where the dependency graph comes in. It's a visual map of all the tasks, where the arrows show which tasks must be completed before others can begin. For example, you can't put a roof on a house before the walls are built. A path in this graph is a sequence of tasks that must be executed one after another. Your goal as a parallel programmer is to find the maximum number of tasks you can run simultaneously. In a dependency graph, there is a special path called the critical path. It's the longest sequence of tasks that must run sequentially. Why is this important? Because the length of this path determines the shortest time in which the entire program can be executed in parallel. No matter how many processors you have, you can never finish the job faster than the critical path allows. The ratio of total work to the critical path length gives us the average degree of concurrency, how many tasks you can do at once on average. This brings us to a major reality check in parallel computing, Amdahl's law. The equation might look scary, but the concept is simple. It says, some part of the processing will always have to remain sequential. Think about it. A program needs to start up, load files, and give its final answer. Those are sequential parts. If f is the fraction of your program that must run sequentially, then 1 minus f is the part you can parallelize. Amdahl's law shows us the maximum theoretical speedup, s, we can ever achieve. It teaches us that to get big speedups, we have to make the sequential part, f, as tiny as possible. This slide perfectly connects Amdahl's law back to the dependency graph. The law, in simple terms, states that every task graph will have a critical path, which becomes a limit on speeding up using parallel. That non-parallelizable sequential part of the program, that's essentially the critical path. Amdahl's law is a crucial reminder that just throwing more hardware at a problem won't solve everything. We have to be smart about how we structure the problem to minimize the sequential bottlenecks. When we break a problem up for parallel processing, we generally use one of two major approaches. Data parallelism. This is when all the processors execute the same instructions, but each works on a different part of the data. Example, filtering an image. Every processor runs the filter code, but each is working on a different section of the image pixels. Task parallelism, functional parallelism. This is when the processors work on the same data, but perform different tasks. Example, a weather simulation. One processor handles wind, another handles temperature, and another handles precipitation, all working on the same geographical dataset. The simplest type is embarrassingly parallel problems, where almost no effort is required to divide the work, like rendering frames of a movie. To achieve data or task parallelism, we need to perform decomposition, breaking the problem down. This slide names the two main techniques. Data decomposition. You first partition the data, the input, and that naturally forces the work, the code, to be partitioned into tasks. Example, splitting a 1,000,000-row spreadsheet into 10 sections. Functional decomposition. You first split the functions, the work to be done, into multiple tasks, and each task then operates on the relevant data. Example, separating a single program into a data loading task, an analysis task, and a reporting task. Which one you choose depends entirely on the problem you are solving. To classify different types of computer architectures, we use Flynn's taxonomy, which is based on two factors, the number of instruction streams, I, and the number of data streams, D. SISD, single instruction, single data. This is the traditional model, one core doing one thing at a time. It's what all CPUs were up to around 1990. MISD, multiple instruction, single data. This model is almost entirely theoretical and impractical. The idea of two independent programs trying to run on the exact same stream of data at the same time is usually avoided by operating systems because it leads to errors. The other two classifications are the ones we deal with most today in parallel computing. SIMD, single instruction, multiple data. All processors execute the exact same code, but each works on a different piece of data. This is the perfect architecture for things like graphics processing units, or GPUs. GPUs have thousands of cores, and they all run the same math problem on thousands of different pixels simultaneously. MIMD, multiple instruction, multiple data. Each processor can run a different set of instructions on a different set of data. This is the most flexible and the most common architecture in modern computers, found in multi-core CPUs and networked systems. The key here is that each process has its own private memory, and communication is done via message passing. This is how SIMD and MIMD work. To wrap up Flynn's taxonomy, let's look at where they live today. SISD, historical single-core CPUs. MISD, theoretical, not practical. SIMD, the dominant force in GPUs, optimized for simple, repetitive math on a massive scale. This is the heart of deep learning training. MIMD, the standard for multi-core CPUs and computer clusters, allowing for maximum flexibility where different parts of a complex program can run independently. This slide reinforces the role of MIMD in modern high-performance computing. MIMD means fully independent processes communicating via message passing. A multi-core processor is a special, very common case of a multiprocessor. In a multi-core chip, we have multiple independent processors all living on the same piece of silicon, sharing the same physical chip, but still acting independently to run different threads of instructions on different data. It's the power of many chips, but in one compact package. When you look at high-end servers, like the one pictured here, you see true multiprocessor systems. These servers often have multiple physical processor sockets on the system board. They communicate using very high-speed links, like the UltraPath Interconnect UPI ports. Think of UPI as a super-fast highway connecting the multiple CPU brains. These links are necessary because even though the processors are on the same board, they need a dedicated, incredibly quick way to share data and coordinate their parallel work. Let's zoom in on the multi-core processor again. We've established it's a special case of MIND, all on the same chip. Its parallel power comes from having different cores executing different threads, multiple instructions. These cores operating on different parts of memory, multiple data. This architecture is essential for modern operating systems and applications to run smoothly, allowing you to stream a video, download a file, and edit a document all at the same time. This is an Intel Sandy Bridge, which is a specific type of multi-core processor. To maximize performance, computers use a memory hierarchy, a tiered system of storage. It's a trade-off between speed, cost, and capacity. At the top, we have on-chip memory, like L1 cache. Very expensive, but incredibly fast. It's right next to the CPU. In the middle, we have main memory, RAM, cheaper, fast, and always shared between processes. And at the bottom, we have virtual memory, disk storage. Very cheap, but very slow. The computer uses this as a temporary overflow when RAM is full. The principle is simple. The closer the memory is to the CPU, the faster and more expensive it is. Let's focus on the top of that hierarchy, cache memory. The CPU doesn't want to wait for main memory, so it keeps a tiny amount of the most frequently used data in fast cache, which is often right on the CPU chip itself. You usually have L1, L2, and L3 caches, going from smallest, fastest, L1, to largest, slowest, L3. The key detail for parallelism is that these caches can be private per core, like on the Intel Itanium, or shared between cores, like on the Intel Xeon. Deciding how to share or separate cache is a critical design choice that impacts how quickly processes can communicate. How do all these components, CPU, memory, cache, I/O, connect? Through buses. These are shared links that connect different parts of the system. While they are great for saving wires and allowing for flexibility, sharing a bus requires a process called arbitration, deciding who gets to use the bus next, and synchronization, making sure two devices don't try to use it at the same time. We use many different types, from older legacy buses to modern standard buses like USB and Ethernet, and even proprietary buses for high-performance devices. The final piece of the hardware puzzle for performance is I/O data transfer, input-output. Moving data from a hard drive to the CPU can be a massive bottleneck. To solve this, we use DMA, or Direct Memory Access. A DMA controller is a specialized piece of hardware that allows an I/O device, like a network card or disk controller, to read or write data directly to or from the main memory, without involving the CPU. This frees up the CPU to continue working on our parallel tasks, making the whole system much more efficient. To summarize our hardware discussion, a single-core processor is the traditional model. All tasks are handled sequentially by one core. This is simple but has hard limits on speed due to Amdahl's law and physical constraints. A multi-core processor is the modern standard. Multiple cores on the same chip, enabling true parallel processing. It's the key to handling the complex, massive computations required for deep learning. This architecture demands that we write our software to embrace parallelism, which is what we will focus on in the coming lessons. Thank you for joining me for this module on parallel processing. I hope you now have a solid foundation in the hardware and architecture that makes modern high-performance computing possible. Next time, we're going to bridge the gap between hardware and software by diving into libraries for parallel and distributed tasks. This is where we learn the practical tools and code that let us harness the power of multi-core processors and clusters.